to this full day of eating video. In this video I'm going to show everything that I ate in a day a few days ago, and I'll provide the total calories, total macronutrients and the total micronutrients as well at the very end. This full day of eating was during a period where I was experimenting with not eating complex carbohydrates, and so the only carbohydrates that I was eating came from fruit, honey and dairy. I have since began experimenting with different complex carbohydrates and trying to figure out which one works best for me, or if I should include them at all. And I plan to create another full day of eating video in the near future where I discuss the results of that experimentation with complex carbohydrates, and I'll go over what worked for me, and hopefully you can benefit from my experiences. In this video, as I showcase how I cook and prepare my meals and what my meals consist of, I want to detail how I personally fared without complex carbohydrates. And in addition to what I've learned from not eating complex carbohydrates, I also want to talk about the most important lessons that I've learned about diet over the past 3 years. 3 years in which I have been consciously eating for a purpose which is not solely limited to enjoyment. And so without further ado, it's time for breakfast, or it's time for me to show you what I had for breakfast a few days ago. So normally I don't eat for quite a while after I get up in the morning. On this particular day, I had my first meal at 10:30 and I got up at around 6:30. I actually need to do some more experimentation in this area, because I first decided to do this because I had seen it somewhere online that we can work better fasted in the morning, and I took that as fact, and therefore I stopped eating early in the morning and I waited for a while before I had my first meal. But there's no actual empirical evidence on my part to suggest that I actually work better fasted in the morning. I just took it for granted that the person who said that online was telling the truth, or that he somehow knew that all humans work in this manner. So I do need to do some experimentation on that, but notwithstanding that fact, I had my first meal at 10:30. About half an hour to an hour prior to eating my meals, I tend to have some fruit, hence the pineapple, as this is around the amount of time it takes for your blood sugars to peak after eating simple carbohydrates such as fruit. And because your blood sugar levels are peaking, insulin levels in the bloodstream will be higher. And we want this to be the case when we are eating our meals, as insulin is a primary anabolic hormone, which means that it promotes the synthesis of smaller molecules into macromolecules, and it discourages their breakdown for use as energy. So in theory, it should promote muscle protein synthesis, in essence. And so most meals I eat, I try to have some fruit beforehand. As for why I chose pineapple, pineapple is quite a nutritious fruit. It's high in vitamin C, high in manganese, has a reasonable amount of copper. I tend to eat pineapple every day because it's hard to get enough manganese in your diet, especially when you don't eat grains such as oats or wheat. As to what manganese is good for, I don't actually walk around with such knowledge at my disposal, but looking at it now, it lowers inflammation, promotes brain health, and supports wound healing, supports healthy bones and connective tissue. It's an antioxidant. So I don't actually possess that knowledge or remember that kind of detail, but what I will always remember is that it's an essential nutrient and pineapple is a great source. I will come back to micronutrition later on in the video. So as you watch me prepping and cooking meals here, I don't think it's necessary for me to give a running commentary of what I'm doing. I think that anything you might learn from my approach to food preparation, you can learn just by watching. And so whilst I prepare meals, let me come back to what I've learned after experimenting with a diet free from complex carbs, or only eating meat, fish or seafood, eggs, dairy, fruit and honey. This isn't the first time that I've done this, and when I previously followed this diet, I did feel as though I had less energy whilst training. So I reintroduced tubers, that is potatoes and sweet potatoes, and I think my energy levels during training improved. However, potatoes did cause me some discomfort. It was very mild, but it did cause me some discomfort in my digestive system, and I therefore went back to just animal products, fruit, and honey. I spent about 2 weeks eating this diet, and I once again noticed that my energy levels were lower during intense training. This time around, I didn't eat anywhere near as much fat as I did the last time I tried this diet, and therefore I found I was also constantly hungry because I didn't want to overeat protein, and fruit wouldn't leave me satiated. I didn't want to eat too much fruit either. I wouldn't say that satiation struggles are a big problem with this type of diet, and perhaps I feared fat or saturated fat too much. But one thing is for sure, and that is that I personally experienced a drop in my ability to push through intense exercise. I certainly wouldn't rule this diet out, as the satiation issues I was having were the biggest factor driving me to change up my diet again this time, and I suppose I could have reintroduced more fat to increase the calories, and that is something that I may do in the future. But like I said, this still leaves me with less in the tank during training, and so it's also possible that some form of complex carbohydrate could be good for me. Anyways, that has been my experience with this diet. Everyone is different, however, and will respond to different foods in different ways. I think there is value in me outlining my own experiences with diet, but I certainly don't think that what works for me will work for everyone. And that brings me to the first thing about diet that I've learned and that I wish to talk about. Before I get into that though, let's have a look at what I've been whipping up over the past 5 minutes. So if you haven't been able to guess already, for breakfast on this particular day, I had steak with eggs and avocado. The avocado was smashed up along with some lime, some sumac, some oregano, and some pink Himalayan salt. The eggs were cooked in some butter in a stainless steel pan. The steak was cooked in beef tallow in that same stainless steel pan and seasoned with salt and black pepper. The steak was cooked to a nice medium rare, and this meal was absolutely devoured. I also had some lamb's liver, which I actually nearly forgot about. I should have ate this along with everything else, but I just forgot about it. Liver is basically like a multivitamin. It's like nature's multivitamin, so I just eat about an ounce a day. When I give the calories, macronutrients, and micronutrient totals at the end of the video, I'll go over why liver is so good and all of the vitamins and minerals which it contains. And that pretty much concludes meal one, and here are the macronutrient totals and the calories for this meal. This was actually my pre-workout meal, so around about 2 hours after this, I would have started training, and about half an hour before training, I had a banana, which you can see pictured here, and that would add approximately 96 calories and around about 23 grams of carbohydrate to keep me fueled for my workout. And that brings us on to the post-workout meal, and as I'm preparing this, allow me to go back to that first principle about diet that I've learned over these past 3 years and that I wish to talk about. That is, listen to your own body and experiment with what works for you. My own experimentation isn't over yet, and it may even be the case that the optimal diet for me to feel and perform at my best will change over time. It might not be a fixed diet that I'm chasing. It might be something that changes as I mature, as I get older, as my body changes. But regardless, my goal is to discover the dietary principles that would be optimal for me, or to follow a regime as close to optimal as possible. And I believe that optimal diet is going to be different for everyone. You know, there are so many people promoting this or that diet, telling you that you can't eat this or that or the other. And if you were to listen to all of them, you literally couldn't eat anything at all. You know, you can't eat meat, can't eat vegetables, can't eat fruit, can't eat grains or potatoes or anything like that. You can't eat dairy. You know, you need to spend £2,000 on a reverse osmosis filter before you can even drink water. You know, you're not allowed to drink water, and so on. Striving for perfection isn't a bad thing, of course, but these fads are blown way out of proportion. You know, they profit from our desires for perfection. These sweeping statements about food groups that are terrible and harmful and that you should never eat seem to me to be the result of people attaching themselves inextricably to an idea, or people trying to make a profit or benefit personally in some way. Such statements are just a mask for some ulterior motive. And I appreciate that it is hard to separate friends from foes when it comes to those who give dietary advice. What is for sure, however, is that you shouldn't eliminate any whole food from your diet unless it is causing you manifest health issues. or unless you've done a personal trial elimination period and felt better. I say whole food because these are the foods that humans have been eating for years and years and have substantial evidence pointing toward their suitability long term. You can eliminate sweets and chocolate without doing any personal trials or elimination periods and seeing if you feel better, because sweets and chocolate don't have any micronutrients. They're not a whole food. They're not nutrient dense. There's nothing in them that you need. They're just pure sugar and fat basically. But for a whole food, you need to have a good reason to eliminate a whole food from your diet. Of course, if you don't like a certain food group or you don't like a certain whole food, then you can eliminate from your diet. That's a perfectly good reason to eliminate a food from your diet. But I'm saying that you shouldn't follow these fads, and you need to take what people say about diet online with a pinch of salt. What I'm saying is that it is more important that you stick to whole foods rather than worrying about, oh, I shouldn't eat this whole food or I shouldn't eat that whole food. What you should really be worrying about is, I shouldn't eat processed foods. Those are the types of foods that we need to focus on eliminating in our diets. It is true, however, that there are so many people out there who just do not do well when they include certain whole foods in their diet. There are certain food groups that just do not agree with certain people, and that's why I'm saying that you need to do some personal experimentation and find out what works for you, because the optimal diet for each of us is going to be very different. So that is one of the lessons that I learned about diet over the last 3 years. Try and find some personal, empirical evidence behind your dietary choices, because there is so much variation between individuals, especially when you're deviating from well-established principles or foundations. Especially if you are going to follow some new fad or something that is controversial and novel. And so, speaking of foundations, there is a foundation upon which we should conduct such experimentation. And there's a lot of nutrition science that can help us to establish some general principles that we should only deviate from if we have a very, very good reason to. And I want to talk about two of the general principles that I follow, which I think should be foundational to almost everyone's diet. The first of these I have already mentioned, and that is to eat whole foods. A whole food being a one ingredient food available in nature, plant or animal food. I would say that this includes foods that have been processed slightly, such as cheese or yogurt. I'm referring here to one ingredient natural foods. And this should be self-explanatory. Whole foods are satiating and nutrient dense, and eating as close to a whole food diet from natural sources that we can manage is a great rule of thumb when we want to optimize our diet for any of the goals that I mentioned earlier in the introduction. The post-workout meal has now been assembled. I'm sure you've been waiting in suspense to find out what the heck I've been making this whole time. To be honest, I've never made this before. It was a very impromptu meal. Normally I would eat a fresh fillet of salmon if I was having salmon, but I didn't have any fresh salmon on this particular day. So I had tinned salmon and I didn't really know what to do with it, but I decided to make what you might call a salad bowl with some tomatoes, some bell pepper, some apple that I picked off of our apple tree in my garden, some more of that same smashed avocado with sumac, oregano, pink Himalayan salt and lime, 2 boiled eggs with salt and pepper, and then to moisten up the tinned salmon, I mixed up some Greek yogurt, some raw honey, and some chili flakes in a bowl, and then I put it in with the salmon. Normally you would have like tuna mayo or something, and I thought, well, this is kind of similar, so just threw it in there. Very random, but this was actually a fire meal, I can't lie. I'll pop up the total calories and the macros now on the screen, and we will move on to meal 3. Oh, and I also had an orange about half an hour before I ate this meal. As you would have seen in the clip, I just almost forgot to mention that. Given that on this day I wasn't eating complex carbs, meal 3 was also a pretty unconventional one. So I had 2 kiwis about half an hour before the meal, and then I made chicken curry with egg fried rice, except I didn't have any rice. And then I didn't make the vegetables into a sauce because I wanted to keep the veg for more solid food. So it wasn't actually chicken curry at all, it was just diced chicken breast with peppers and tomatoes, seasoned with salt, pepper, and curry powder, along with 2 scrambled eggs. But anyway, that was meal 3. And then alongside this meal, I had a pint of raw milk, which I get from a local farm. Here are the calories and macros for this meal. And then we will move on to the last meal, which is in between a snack and a meal. The first step to prepare meal 4 is to go out and forage some wild blackberries. These things grow absolutely everywhere near where I live, and blackberries are incredibly nutrient dense, incredibly good for you. So I pretty much eat these things every day. And so once we've gone out and gathered some of those and washed them, we could start preparing our yogurt bowl, which is what meal 4 is going to be. Whilst I'm preparing this meal, I want to come back to the second dietary principle, which I think should be foundational to everyone's diet. This principle is to focus on micronutrition. There are many essential vitamins and minerals which we need to get in our diets, and for our bodies to operate at the optimal level, we need to reach an adequate intake level of these nutrients. This is another reason why we need to focus on whole foods. So if you were to eat only whole foods and eat from a variety of food groups, just by virtue of getting in enough calories, enough protein, a reasonable ratio of carbohydrates and fats to keep you fueled, you would most likely meet quite a few of the reference intakes for these micronutrients for all your vitamins and minerals. You of course wouldn't meet them all, however, and so I think it's useful to have this as a second rule alongside eating whole foods. I track my micronutrients via an app called Chronometer, which I will discuss at the end of the video when I break down the full day of eating in depth. So to summarize the 3 main rules, which I think should be fundamental to everyone's diet, you should eat whole foods, focus on micronutrition, and factoring in those 2 principles, you should find which foods work for you as an individual. And so here we have the last meal of the day. So this bowl consists of some Greek yogurt and frozen berries, which I smashed up into the Greek yogurt until it became kind of like the yogurt that you would buy in a shop, like a fruit yogurt from Activia or something. And then once that was done, I added some cinnamon, some pink Himalayan salt, a little bit of 100% dark chocolate, some raw honey, and some of those wild blackberries that I picked earlier. And that was pretty much it. And this is absolutely delicious. I also had a pear and an apple that I got from my back garden around the same time as this meal. Here are the calories and macros for this meal, including the pear and the apple. And then the one supplement that I take is vitamin D3 and K2, because I live in Ireland and we do not get very much sunlight, and therefore I can't get vitamin D from the sun, so I need to take a vitamin D supplement. I used to take creatine, but I actually ran out and forgot to buy some, so I didn't take any on this particular day, and I haven't taken any since, but I will eventually order some, and those are the only 2 supplements that I take. And the reason for that is because I get all of my micronutrients from food. And so that pretty much concludes my full day of eating. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm going to pop up the total calories, macronutrients and micronutrients on the screen now. The app which I use to track my food is called Chronometer. It's great because you can track all of your micronutrients, and it has a very detailed food database, so I think it's great. You might be thinking that I didn't eat a whole lot of calories on this particular day, and you are correct. But the truth is, I don't actually track my calories or pay attention to how many calories I eat. I just make sure I get enough micronutrients, I meet my protein goal. I don't worry too much about my carbs and fats. And like I said, I feared fat too much when I was on this diet. I've since reintroduced complex carbs, and I do feel better. I feel like I have more energy when I'm training. But that's what it's all about. It's all about personal experimentation, especially when nutrition science gets fuzzy, because diet can be really individual. I also mentioned earlier that I would go over why liver is such a good addition to one's diet. So I'll pop up the micronutrients for liver. You can see that it's really high in B12. It's a reasonable level of B6, B2, B3, B5. Has a decent amount of folate, has a hell of a lot of vitamin A, which is actually one of the reasons that it's really good, And this vitamin A is the most bioavailable form. This vitamin A is retinol, and your body doesn't have to convert it into retinol. And then if we go down to the minerals, it's really high in copper, which is really, really good because a lot of muscle meat will be high in zinc, and zinc and copper are both absorbed or broken down by the same enzyme. So if you have too much zinc compared to copper, then that can inhibit the absorption of copper. So if you only eat muscle meat, it can be really important to make sure that you get in some form of organ meat or some other source of copper. And then as you can see, liver also has a good bit of iron, a good bit of selenium and phosphorus and other things as well. And this is only 24 grams of liver, those two little tiny bits of liver that I ate after my first meal. So I really think that adding a little tiny bit of liver into your diet is a really good idea. And so that is the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed and derived some form of value from it. I just want to add here that diet isn't about tips and tricks like anything in life, and no amount of YouTube videos are going to help you to find an easy way to reach your goals. All I can do is tell of my own experiences, but you need to actively take responsibility for your own life. You need to go out and actively, consciously decide what works for you, try and improve your own life, and take on that responsibility yourself because no one else can do it for you. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless.